Welcome to the Friends of Carrington Moss video, which talks you through the key concerns we have about the release of Greenbelt in Trafford and specifically highlights some of the key issues about the proposed developments on Carrington Moss. I'm Marge Powner, I'm the chair of Friends of Carrington Moss. As you can see, I also support my community with other local, regional and national roles. And I've learned an awful lot about the planning ecosystem over the last 6 years or so. It might be helpful to start by challenging the rhetoric. There is a myth that building lots of houses will bring down house prices. That's incorrect. There are many articles which confirm that house prices are not impacted by building more homes, and certainly not by building them on Greenbelt. One of those articles is mentioned in our recent blog, which is titled Confusing Greenbelt Messages from Our Politicians. You can find it on our website. The article explains that Bank of England researchers suggest that high house prices are determined by finance, not by supply and demand. Given what's said by our politicians and the media, you could be excused for not knowing the facts that are set out on this graphic. All of these points are taken from publicly available data sets, most of which are funded by the public purse. So let's look into some of this in a bit more detail. Despite the Department for Levelling Up producing data which suggests that over 83,000 families are homeless, less than 8,000 additional homes for social rent were built in England in the year 21-22, the latest available data at this point in time. You can see from this table produced by the Office of National Statistics that the numbers have been appalling for years. Our politicians seem to be fixated on providing homes for people to buy, even if they're investor homes, Airbnbs, or if they just remain empty, rather than focusing on the most vulnerable in our society, those in the most need. The census data from 2021 has been a useful actual snapshot which verifies the position at that point in time. Looking again quickly at this slide, it suggested that there were 1.5 million surplus dwellings over households in England. These figures are taken from the 10-yearly census data that's available online, and you can see that the number of surplus dwellings has been growing over time. Drilling down into the Greater Manchester figures, you can see that the sub-region built a surplus of 28,768 homes in the period between 2011 and 2021. That is almost 30,000 homes, and these figures do not include the number of empty homes brought back into use. You can see that Trafford built a significant number of homes during the period that do not support households. As I mentioned earlier, these could be investor homes, second homes, Airbnbs, or homes that just remain empty. The other important point about the census data is that it validates or contradicts previous estimates. Many of you will be aware that the government continues to rely on the 2014 household estimates and projections for its housing target formula, despite figures from 2016 and 2018 showing that estimates in 2014 were significantly overstated. The 2021 census data shows that the overestimate for households across the whole of Greater Manchester is around 50,000 households, and for Trafford the figure is overstated by over 8,000 households. These figures are very important when you consider Greater Manchester's decision to release Greenbelt. So Places for Everyone is a discriminatory plan which sets out the policies developers must abide by for a 17-year period. It covers 9 authorities in Greater Manchester, all the authorities except Stockport. It does not adequately consider the climate or biodiversity emergencies and only proposes employment land for warehousing. There's nothing about the rural economy in this plan, and it has added an excessive buffer, contingency if you like, over and above its warehousing requirements to justify concreting over peat moss, grades 1, 2 and 3 agricultural land, woodland and wetland habitats, which will result in huge increases in HGV traffic and the subsequent air, noise, light, vibration and water pollution, to say nothing of the carbon emissions generated. Companies will make profits whilst our health and well-being is affected and NHS costs escalate. And whilst there are targets for market housing, the targets for affordable housing have been removed from the Places for Everyone policy. Yes, you heard it correctly. The most important targets in the whole plan have been removed from policy. The most vulnerable in our society are not priority in this plan. Now, let's continue looking at those figures. Remember, we have seen that the numbers generated by the government's housing target are significantly overinflated. For the authorities in the plan area, the target figure is calculated to be over 175,000 homes. At an average of 2.4 people per household, that gives us around 420,000 additional residents in Greater Manchester, against an organic population increase of less than 166,000. Huge, unnecessary and unsustainable growth. Clearly, we do recognise that GM has a preferred growth strategy, but how can growth that's the equivalent of creating 2 new boroughs be a sustainable approach, especially given the infrastructure needed to underpin these developments? We'll come on to this: schools, doctors, dentists, etc. You can see that at over 178,000, the districts have sufficient existing land supply to exceed that target figure. And indeed, the plan itself says that numerically there's no need to release Greenbelt. It is a choice being made by our politicians, so it's not about need at all. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but the planning system is awash with rules and regulations. They're set out in the National Planning Policy Framework and the Planning Practice Guidance, known as the NPPF and the PPG respectively. To calculate the existing land supply, the districts have to create strategic land availability assessments. You may hear these referred to as SLARs. And the guidance states that only land which is considered to be suitable, available and achievable should be included. Districts could also include large and medium windfall sites. These are sites that are currently unknown, but the trends suggest will come forward during the period. The windfall effect amounts to almost 9,000 homes a year across Greater Manchester. So adding almost 150,000 homes to that 178,000 figure when considered across the 17-year period. Clearly now massively exceeding the government's housing need formula. All this data should have been given a very high weighting by the planning inspectors in considering whether the whole of the new Carrington allocation should remain in the plan. Another thing to bear in mind is that the deeper devolution deal, which gives the Greater Manchester Combined Authority more powers covering transport, spatial planning and housing investment, among other things, has brought millions of pounds of public money to Greater Manchester, to regenerate brownfield land and deliver affordable homes. Despite this, Greenbelt release unnecessarily remains in the plan, and unsustainable locations like New Carrington will be concreted over for greed, not need. Significant modifications to the Places for Everyone plan have been proposed by the GMCA. Not all have been accepted by the planning inspectors, but there are some notable and negative proposed changes to the plan, which we'll be addressing in our response to the modifications consultation, which is the next step in the examination process. If you're interested in finding out more about this, please email us or join our next online public meeting. The net amount of Greenbelt release has been increased by almost 30% due to the removal of Greenbelt additions. Whilst this does not affect Trafford, it's a major change to the plan, and when taken into consideration alongside the recognition that more Greenbelt can now be removed in the upcoming local plans for each district, it's a key change in policy since 2019. As mentioned previously, affordable housing targets have been removed from the Places for Everyone policy, and also the commitment to Brownfield First has gone from the plan. The GMCA did attempt to significantly weaken the commitment to carbon zero, but the planning inspectors did not accept the modification. The carbon implications of this plan will considerably affect Greater Manchester's ability to meet its own targets, and in fact reports have already been produced that demonstrate that GM is already behind where it needs to be to achieve its carbon neutral ambitions. The level of unsustainable growth set out in this plan will see the current position worsen exponentially, especially given the reliance on road traffic rather than on sustainable passenger and freight transport options. So what about Carrington Moss? This wonderful green space with over 200 hectares of best and most versatile Grade 2 agricultural land and over 100 hectares of woodland. Natural England suggests there are around 280 hectares of deep peat, although an academic study in 1995 suggested there were 325 hectares of deep peat at that time. Two of the electoral wards on either side of the Moss include some of the most disadvantaged residents in Trafford, and they, along with many others, are able to extensively use this free to access local green space for walking, cycling and horse riding. And it does incorporate the preferred riding routes for over 1,000 horses stabled in the area, which along with other rural activities contribute significantly to Trafford's local economy. It provides a variety of health benefits to the community and is a destination for our local social prescribing team to support those who need additional help and care. Between the peat moss, the woodland and other vegetation, Carrington Moss has extensive carbon capture capabilities. It also soaks up significant surface water flooding, which will have to go elsewhere if it's concreted over. It currently contributes to nature's recovery and to climate mitigation, and as local people will have seen, supports our future food security. There are a number of sites of biological importance and sites of special scientific interest that will be impacted by any development. The changes to the water table, for example, the human footfall, the traffic, the air, noise, light, vibration and water pollution will all have a negative effect on these very important locations. The current plan is to build 5,000 homes and 350,000 square metres of warehousing employment space and 4 major new roads on, across and around Carrington Moss. We believe the plan should be reduced to focus on regenerating the brownfield sites without releasing any greenbelt, especially given that there is no numerical need to do so. Trafford acknowledged that this is not a sustainable location, but have not proposed any sustainable freight transport, despite the proximity to the Manchester Ship Canal and the presence of the former railway lines. There is no committed funding for any sustainable passenger transport either, so the vast majority of resident, employee, and commercial transport will be by road, significantly increasing air, noise, light, vibration, and water pollution, and carbon emissions. Unsurprisingly, the Health and Safety Executive have already raised concerns about the proposed development, which again was not given sufficient weight by the planning inspectors when considering whether the greenbelt elements of this site should remain in the plan. Trafford has already given planning approval to one Carrington business, which will, when it's fully operational, see over 700 additional HGVs transporting hydrogen gas each day on local roads. An alternative solution could and should have been provided. Pipeline to a more sustainable location, for example, rather than Trafford planning for residents' health and well-being to be impacted on this scale. Risks are typically measured using what is known as a red, amber, green or RAG reporting. This is essentially a traffic light system that tells you that red statuses are an alert, amber statuses signal caution, and green means everything is on track. School places have already been assessed as a red risk for Trafford, and you can see that the Heath Farm Lane planning application highlighted the problem back in 2019. In fact, the new Carrington master plan does not show any schools within the allocation boundary, despite this one location generating around 2,000 additional school places. It appears to suggest that school places will be found for the residents of New Carrington on the other side of the Manchester Ship Canal. Provision of health services is no better. Dental services in the area are already a challenge, and around 5 additional GPs will be needed to support this new population. Communities have not been involved in the development of the new Carrington master plan, nor in the decision to push forward with the Carrington Relief Road, rather than seeking funding for more sustainable passenger and freight transport options, which would reduce transport-related social exclusion. We'll come back to the Carrington Relief Road in a future video. To be clear, building a road across Carrington Moss will not meet the current and future requirements of communities, nor will it support achievement of climate-related targets, including carbon emissions. Greater Manchester actually has a strategy for transport and an associated transport delivery plan, which worryingly appears to suggest that the Carrington Relief Road might be the first phase of a much bigger scheme. It seems the citizens of New Carrington and the current residents of the area are to suffer the impact of air, noise, light, vibration and water pollution caused by developments in neighbouring areas as well as our own. Interestingly, the Places for Everyone plan lists a number of necessary interventions, some of which you can see are not geographically that close to the development area. But there is clearly a recognition that the level of traffic to be generated will have far-reaching consequences. We understand that none of these interventions are currently funded, and only the Carrington Relief Road is a commitment within the Greater Manchester Transport Strategy. A very conservative estimate totals the cost of these interventions at £400 million. Given the current climate, that's a challenging amount to fund. And remember, New Carrington is only one of 34 unsustainable greenbelt allocations in the Places for Everyone plan, all of which have similar lists of necessary interventions. According to the viability assessment, the developer contributions total 68 million, which includes their contributions to schools, green space, and other policy requirements, as well as transport. So funding to fill the gap will not be coming from that source, despite the fact that even if the housing is sold for only £200,000 per dwelling, 5,000 homes, that's a total of £1 billion before you include any revenue for employment space. It seems the public purse is the loser all round, not just in terms of funding the infrastructure requirements, but also in addressing the consequences, additional costs to the NHS, for example. So with all the above in mind, let's look at whether there is benefit to communities as a result of this development. You can find a detailed assessment in our blog called New Carrington and the Public Interest Test. Effectively, the benefits of the housing and employment is low because the brownfield sites already have approval and construction on Greenbelt is unnecessary to meet the housing numbers required by the government's housing target. There are a number of alternative brownfield sites, including windfall sites, that have come forward since the Places for Everyone plan was submitted. The number of affordable homes on this site will be negligible, and there is no committed funding for sustainable passenger or freight transport. In fact, freight transport hasn't even been proposed in any form. When set against the harms to be caused by this plan, the loss of an irreplaceable habitat, the peat moss, the loss of Grade 2 agricultural land, the harms to the health and well-being of residents, along with the lost opportunities to mitigate climate change, all bring the scales down against the release of Greenbelt. Sustainability is about much more than just the materials buildings and roads are constructed with. It's about the loss of habitats, the lack of sustainable transport, and the loss of land that will support our children and our children's children to survive in the future. With all that you've heard in this presentation, do you think this is a sustainable development? If you're not yet following us on Facebook or Twitter, or you're not yet on our circulation list for our monthly emails, or you've not yet joined our 200 Club, please visit our website for more information. You could also contact your local councillors and MP to let them know your views. Thank you for listening.